Hi folks, Brad Hurst here again with our next video, Doctrine of Antichrist 8, putting it all together biblically. Just to make a comment here, as I've been studying and reading over the past years and even over the development over this series of Doctrine of Antichrist, I've learned to change and to make adjustments. You look at history and you see in some cases history doesn't fit what often is presented as a prophetic narrative, and so you continue to read and to watch and to look and to see what you can find, and if you need to make changes, you need to make changes. There's no need to try to stick a size 12 foot inside a size 3 shoe. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. You either need to do something with your foot or you need to do something with the shoe. And so let's not do that. And if we have problems in our eschatology, let's not insert gaps or try to play spiritual twister or prophetic twister to make things work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If the passage speaks against you, I would encourage you to make the change. There's a lot of freedom in being able to do that as we grow in our knowledge of the scriptures and of how things have developed over time and so forth. Well, we're looking at history. Okay, you can't argue the history. We're looking at history. And as we get a better understanding of history, it's pretty easy to see how easily the prophetic narrative actually fits. So let's go ahead and I want to challenge you to make the changes that you need to make. And, as I continue along, I'll be making them as well. But I will not be making any changes based on anybody's going to thump their chest about what their pastor said or what some, preacher somewhere said or what somebody read in a book or something like that. If you actually present it from a biblical perspective and you actually look at the history, and if you can and if there's an easy fit, then that's what we go with. So let's go on. We will be looking at Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 10 through 12, Revelation 12, Revelation 13, Revelation 17. Okay, this is pretty easy to see. I think that there's really no argument over some of this. You'll see later on that there'll be some dispute, but I think you can get a pretty easy fit. Daniel chapter 2, the head of gold, Babylon. Daniel chapter 2, chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia. Daniel 2, belly and thighs of brass. This would be the Greco-Roman Empire, and this is where people would disagree, but I think there are problems if you're going to make this just to be Rome, and we've talked about some of those in the past, and some of those will be addressed here. With ancient Greece over there on the left, you can see that Greece, predominantly going from Greece, went all the way into parts of Iran, and it was actually in Iran that the Greek Empire established its capital of Persepolis. And then you have the Roman period, which basically starts in the areas with the Roman Republic and develops in the western portions of the Mediterranean area and into parts of Turkey and what have you. And this is the Roman period of what I consider to be the Greco-Roman Empire. And then finally, when we get later periods, we end up with the Byzantine Empire, which is seen here. Its extent under Julian was quite extensive, but eventually it was predominantly over the area of parts of southeastern Europe and then Asia Minor, and it eventually fell in 1453 AD. So the Greco-Roman period lasts from 320 BC through about 1453 AD. So you have, almost 1800 years, or was 1700 years of an expansive time here. It ends in 1453 AD. And so we have to fully understand, historically speaking, Rome was part of the Greco-Roman Empire. Its influence was about 400, 500 years, but predominantly the influence of the Greco-Roman Empire was centered in and around Greece. And that's just a fact, okay? So when we look at the belly and brass of thighs, the belly and thighs of brass, we're looking at the Greco-Roman period, not just Rome. It's a real problem because people have to insert prophetic gaps in order to make things work if they're going to just put Rome in there. And there is nothing in the biblical narrative to insert a prophetic gap. Only a person trying to make a certain paradigm fit will accept a prophetic gap. And that's not from the scripture. Neither is it found in history either. So let's just leave it there. Daniel 2, the legs of iron, two Islamic empires that simultaneously emerge, Ottoman and Safavid. 1453, the fall of the Greco-Roman Empire took place with the fall of Constantinople. From there, two empires rose simultaneously at the same time. They were both Islamic, and they both rose at the same time. One was the Ottoman Empire, seen in the purple. The other one was the Safavid Empire, seen in the green. These two empires, one Sunni, one Shia, rose simultaneously at the same time. And I believe that this best represents the two legs of iron as depicted in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel 2, we see 10 toes of iron and clay. Let me just state here and I'll comment. With the exception of Egypt, most of the nations on the map were under Turkish or Iranian control just prior to World War I. By the time of World War I, the legs of iron had been reduced to the area of the Middle East. Both legs would be divided into separate secular governments. Now there's a little give and take on this as we understand this, and we'll address this here a little bit later on. But there is part of this that best represents what we're kind of looking at. And we kind of take in consideration here that we have this area right up through here, down through Turkey, into this, right in through here, up through this area, right through here. Okay, in this area right through here actually would include parts of Iraq too. Parts of Iraq in this area. This area right through here represented the Ottoman Empire just prior to World War I. So when we look at this and we fully understand that the legs of iron eventually they get smaller and smaller as they get to the point where they're going to be divided up into 10 parts. And then we come over here, this part over here, with what I consider to be the Safavid or the Shia Iranian portions of the empire. We kind of go right up through here, and we had parts of Kuwait into this, and then this parts over here, parts of Bahrain, parts of UAE, and so forth that were involved in these areas as well. This is kind of the breakup of the Safavid or the Shia portion of Islam prior to World War I. And so that's kind of where we see it at that time. When we look at places down below, places like Yemen and Oman, we see down in here, these were under British control. And so it's kind of this area right through here that we have to kind of have a little bit of discretion on. But we'll deal with that here in just a little bit. So let's just keep in mind what the size of the Ottoman Empire, what the size of the Islamic empires were at this time, at least in the Middle East, was reduced essentially to what you see right here. It says, with the exception of Egypt, most of the nations in the map were under Turkish or Iranian control just prior to World War I. By the time of World War I, the legs of iron had been reduced to the area of the Middle East. Both these legs would be divided into separate secular governments. And so I just repeated what I stated here at the very beginning, that we're kind of looking at the territory here that Shia and Sunni Islam, in terms of their empires of Safavid and Ottoman, were basically reduced to these areas as the legs of iron grew smaller and smaller. In our previous video, we showed how that kind of developed over time, how that reduction took place over time. So let's go on to our next slide here. Daniel 2:44, and this is kind of exciting. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. This is cause for both alarm and excitement, because if what we saw in the previous map is a depiction of the breaking up of the legs of iron as it grew smaller over time, and we see it breaking up into several states, we're going to look at those states a little bit later on, and we're going to see how they might possibly be counted. But we're pretty close. If we're not right at 10, we're pretty close at 10. In fact, we have a better shall we say, opportunity here than anybody would have with the European Union with its 27 nations. So Still we're successive here. We have the fall of Constantinople in 1453, which was the fall of, the conclusion of the brass period. Then we had the two Islamic empires coming together at the same time. We had them getting smaller and smaller over time. And then after World War I, we see them being divided up in several nations. And I'll show you, a couple different ways where that could actually easily be seen as 10 separate nations. So let's just move forward. Again, Daniel 7:4, the lion, Babylon. There's no dispute here. Nobody disagrees with this. Again, Daniel 7:5, the bear, Medo-Persia. Daniel 7:6, the leopard, the Greco-Roman Empire. This is where people would dispute, but I think that the case can easily be made, and it's a better fit. Daniel 7:6, the leopard, the Greco-Roman period ends with the Byzantine Empire. It is noteworthy that the number 4 is associated with this leopard. Daniel 7:7, the dreadful beast is presented as one entity, Islam. Unlike what we saw in Daniel chapter 2, where this particular empire is represented as iron and it has two parts, this dreadful beast is presented as one entity, and so its entity or its unifying factor would be Islam. And what's interesting about this beast, as we see later on, or we read later on in Daniel chapter 7, it has brass elements in it and iron elements in it. So it has Greek elements in it, and it also has the elements of iron in it as well, which is represented by the two legs. And so we can see that there are actually two portions that represent the territory and the area that we're originally looking at. It would actually be right through here in the purple with the Ottoman Empire, as we can see right through this, all the way up through here and down through here, up through here. Okay, and then in addition, what we see, and let's go ahead and erase this. In addition, we see the Sunni or the Shia portions under the Safavid coming up right through here, all the way up through here, into this area right down through here, up and around, back down, and up through here. Okay. So someone might ask, what about what we see over here in what we call the Mughal section? That is different. That is an Indian type of empire. It was kind of interesting. There's both Sunni and Shia factors inside there, and it's certainly not part of the territory we're looking at, because we're going to see later on that there's a specific territory that we're looking at, not just different empires. We're looking at territories as well. And later on, the Mughal Empire becomes something completely different over time, and so it doesn't keep the narrative doesn't work. So we're primarily looking at the Ottoman and the Safavid Empire. And by the way, the Mughal Empire essentially came out of both of those as well. So, and anyway, let's go ahead with the next one. Daniel 7:10. So we see 10 horns of power will rise out of the beast. One horn will rise up among them and uproot 3 others. Later on, we will see how it is possible that Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Israel are not counted among the horns. This leaves only 10 or 12 horns left, depending on how one looks at it. Daniel 7:8, a little horn rises up among them and rises to power as he speaks great swelling words and uproots 3 horns from or before him. Daniel 7:9 through 14, the little horn continues to rise until he is interrupted by the arrival of the saints in heaven. His kingdom is assaulted, dismantled, and his body is given to the burning flame. The saints inherit the kingdom, and the other beasts continue for a short time. Verses 15 through 28 are a repetition with added details. Daniel 8, the little horn. This is where it can get a little controversial, but I think that we're going to let the text speak and we're going to let history speak at the same time. Daniel 8, 3 through 4, the ram, Medo-Persia. I want to emphasize the word great. Verse 4, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. We're going to see a successive increase in greatness as we go through this. That's going to be very important in helping to identify the little horn as to who he isn't, okay, and who he might actually be. And Daniel 8, 5 through 8, the he-goat and the horn, Alexander the Great, very great. Now, just a little bit of history right here. When we find out that, Persia comes along, it's the ram, and that ram waxes great, and it kind of does what it wants to do, headed towards the west and towards the north and towards the south. But then a he-goat shows up that has a notable horn between its on its head, and this he-goat comes against the ram and basically destroys the ram, and we find out that this horn will wax very great. In fact, the first horn is the king, which I believe is actually the first king, which I believe is Alexander the Great. So look at verse 8 here. It says, therefore the he-goat waxed very great. Okay, so we've gone from great to very great. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and forward came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And so history tells us that when Alexander the Great, basically established his empire and was resting in the areas of Persepolis and built Alexandria and so forth, and all the great things that he did at the apex of his shall we say, accomplishments, he died, and his empire was broken up and divided to his four generals. And so we'll go on to our next slide and have a look at that. Daniel 8:8, the kingdom divided. The context of Daniel 8 directs us to look at Greece immediately after the death of Alexander and breakup of his kingdom into four parts. Out of one of these will arise the little horn. So we're still being successive here. We have, Persia. Persia is waxing great, and then along comes Greece, destroys Persia, and we see that the first horn, the big great horn of Greece, waxes very great. Okay, and then we're going to move into a section where we're going to see exceeding great. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about the breakup of Alexander's kingdom into four parts, which is represented, I believe, by the four heads of the leopard and possibly even the four wings of the leopard back in Daniel 7. And specifically here, we see that we can look at the division here. Our first division, we can actually look at this area up here where we see, let's go here with red, where we can see in the first number one, we see this area up here. If you happen to notice that star right there, that's actually Istanbul, or what would actually become Istanbul later on. And so we have that, okay? And then let's get rid of this here. Then our next area that we want to look at is right here. Okay, we have this area right through here. This is actually under Cassander, with the first one being underneath Lysimachus, and now we have the area of Cassander. And then next we've got the area over here with number 4. I'm going to go to number 4 next. So we got this area right through here, which is kind of a almost look like a gerrymandered area for Congress, but kind of comes up through here and around through this way and then up through here again. And so this is actually under Ptolemaeus. This is actually the fourth area that I've highlighted here. And then we get to this. Let's erase this right through here. Then we get to this area here, which is actually number 3. And it comes up around through here, on the way up through here, and then eventually up through here. And this is under the Empire of Seleucus. So this is the Seleucid Empire, and this is the empire that we're actually going to look at because it's very important for us to understand the history of what takes place here. So let's go on to our next slide. Daniel 8, 9 through 12, exceeding great. So we've gone from great, very great, to exceeding great. So we're at a point now where we're growing in greatness, okay? And it seems to be greatness in every capacity. So let's just kind of think through this, okay? Verse 9, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Most people apply this part of Daniel to the events of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 175 through 164 BC. The problem is that we are told that the little horn is to wax exceeding great. That would make whoever it is greater than Persia and greater than Alexander. Let's just look geographically. Okay, there are other factors to take into consideration, but let's look just geographically. What do we end up with? Okay, so let's go for this. The ram, Persia, was said to be great. The he-goat, Greece, was said to be very great. And the little horn that comes out of the division of Alexander's empire is said to be exceeding great. So it's better than great. It's much more great. Here's the Persian Empire. Just look at its territory. Just take this in. Here's Greece. Greece is, albeit not much bigger, but it is bigger than the Persian Empire. And so we have successive, increasing levels of greatness here. Well, let's get to this next map. Let's have a look here. Look at the area in this spot right through here. Just have a look at that. That's the territory under the Seleucids, of which Ptolemaeus was part of. Or not Ptolemaeus, but an individual by the name of Antiochus was part of. Okay, I think I may have misstated his name in the previous video or in the previous slide. It's actually Antiochus. Okay, to say that Antiochus represents what we see in Daniel chapter 8 is, to me, absurd, because his territory is less than half the size of what it was underneath Alexander, and it's not even. I mean, it's nowhere the size of what it was even under Persia. And so I think that becomes a real problem when we try to actually make Antiochus be the fit here, because in terms of actually geographically, he's certainly has not exceedingly great. He's actually less great than even Persia altogether geographically. All right, but there are some other factors to take into consideration as well. And we want to go and look at those and see that the Antiochus simply just does not fit. He might have been a type. He might have been a foreshadowing. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But he doesn't fit. And the passage itself doesn't fit for the time of Antiochus, because the language itself doesn't allow for it to fit the time of Antiochus. So let's go forward and move ahead with this. To me, this is one of the biggest prophetic blunders that there is out there. All right. I mean, I know a lot of good people who actually want to, make this work. But to be honest with you, it doesn't work. We're going to see that there's another prophetic blunder out there that doesn't work either. This just doesn't work. Antiochus, just even looking at the map, is not a fit. So if it doesn't fit, let's move forward and allow the text to speak for itself and see if history matches. Let's just go with that. How about that? That's kind of a novel idea. Daniel 8, the little horn. This little horn will do the following: wax exceedingly great to the east, the south, and the beautiful land. Magnify himself against God, and cast some of the stars, which I believe are saints, to the earth and trampled upon them. Take away the daily sacrifice and cast down the sanctuary. It will cause some to depart, apostatize, and cast down the truth. So there's going to be an apostasy associated with this little horn. It will be very successful in its efforts. The length of time given for this impact, by the way, the length of time given for his impact on the temple is 2,300 days, or 6.38, or shall we say 360 Jewish years. That's 813. Okay, so it'd be 6.38 360 day Jewish years. That's what we're looking at. Okay, but there's more information here. Let's just go on. Daniel 8, the little horn. By the way, the mere fact that it's actually called the little horn should connect us back to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel is writing a narrative that's cohesive, and we don't have any indications. It doesn't say another little horn or a different little horn. It just says the little horn. And so when we look at this and we just go, why can't we just make the assumption that the little horn that's being used here is the same little horn that's in Daniel chapter 7, and we're getting different added details that Daniel chapter 7 did not give to us. The vision is for the appointed time of the end. This is what we call a clue. Antiochus Epiphanes, okay, his events took place between 175 BC and 164, long before Christ was even born, or the New Testament period took place. Okay, in chapter 8, verse 19, it talks about it being associated with what we call the indignation. That is also mentioned in 1130 and verse 36, which all Bible scholars who are in the dispensational persuasion will put and apply to what they would consider to be the person of Antichrist, which would actually be correct. But somehow or another, they don't allow these three verses to be connected, verses 8:19, 11:30, and verses 36. We also see the same language associated with the resurrection in Isaiah chapter 26:20, where it talks about this great time of tribulation where the saints are captured out and placed in heaven and held there until the indignation is overpassed. These are what we call clues, folks, and I think that these things speak against the little horn of Daniel 8 being Antiochus Epiphanes. The ram and the he-goat are identified as Persia and Greece, with special emphasis on the first king of Greece and his power. His kingdom is divided up 4 ways, but none will have the power of the first king. Hence, Antiochus cannot be the little horn, since the little horn waxes exceeding great. Again, Daniel 8, the little horn. The characteristics of the little horn. Chapter 8, verses 23 through 25, King James Version. Fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences, it actually means he's very smart. Gets his power from others, destroys wonderfully. Able to make war with a sense of awe. But by the way, Antiochus struggled. He struggled with Egypt. Prosperous. He practiced. In other words, he accomplishes what he sets out to do. Antiochus couldn't do that. He ended up actually being humiliated by Egypt. Cause craft, that is deceit, to prosper, exalt himself, destroy many by peace, and even stand directly against the Prince of Princes, which to be honest with you, I don't see how anybody else can see that that's a reference to Christ. That's a messianic title. With regard to the last, Christ has not even come. Daniel 8 cannot be referring to Antiochus. Daniel 8 tells us that the vision is sealed up and called the vision of the evening and the morning. This is key. Now hang on to your horses. I want you to look at this. Hold on. Have a look at this. The vision of the evening and the morning. And it's sealed up. How did he seal it? Let's look at this. Here's the evening, 9/22/17 in Susa, Iran. Look at the new moon sitting there. That date have any meaning to you? Look at the morning, 9/23/17, Susa, Iran. That date have any meaning to you? Daniel sealed the vision by not giving us the astronomical data revealed in Revelation 12. That is how he sealed the vision. And he said that the vision was for the time of the end. Does that cause any cause for concern or excitement for you? How about the division of the 10 toes and them being in place possibly even now? Daniel chapters 10 through 11 gives us the details from the time of Persia, the breakup of Greece, to the rise of the king, the abomination of desolation, and the fall of the king. By the way, Daniel 8 talks about the abomination of desolation. Daniel chapter 11 also talks about the abomination of desolation. And so also I do believe that Daniel chapter 9 does. Are we to expect that there's two abominations of desolation? One under Antiochus and another one later on, one that takes place under Christ? Or one, I mean, how many abominations of desolations are there actually going to be? But prophetically speaking, in Daniel, it appears as though that there's only one. Although if you use Antiochus, you're going to have several. Chapter 12 gives us the details of the resurrection. That is chapter 12 of the book of Daniel. So this is kind of a brief overview of the prophetic scenarios of Daniel. And we can see history fits. It's not hard to make history fit. In fact, you don't have to make it fit, you have to unmake it. Look at Revelation 12, the astronomical sign of the woman and the dragon, verses 1 through 5. Note the casting down of the stars, just as in Daniel 8. The woman flees and the woman flees and there's war in heaven. That's Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 through 9. The dragon is cast out and goes after the woman and her seed, who give her testimony to Christ. That's actually chapter 12, verses 10 through 19. We saw this in Daniel 7, where judgment is in heaven and the little horn goes after the saints. We saw this also in chapter 8 of Daniel, that he goes after the saints. The little horn goes after the saints. The language is very similar. The language is very, very similar. And so we have no need to try to go back and find some past prophetic fulfillment and that doesn't fit, and we're trying to fit a size 12 foot inside a size 3 shoe. It just doesn't fit. Let's look at Revelation 13, the rise of the beast. 7 heads, 13:1. This is an added detail not seen in Daniel. Okay? We see the beast and we see the horns, but what we don't see is we don't see the 7 heads in Daniel chapter 7 or Daniel chapter 8. We actually hear in Revelation chapter 13, we see 7 heads. And these are going to be very helpful in helping us to identify the territory that we're talking about if it's not already identified in your mind. Okay, it says that the first one was like a leopard. That's Greece. Then we had the feet of the bear. Okay, that is actually that's Persia. Then we have the mouth of the lion. That's Babylon. That might be referring to as Doctrine. Look at Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. You see it right there. We've already gone through it. Okay, Revelation is borrowing from Daniel because it's actually talking about the same events, giving us more information, and we're looking at the geographic locations that are being associated with the body of the beast itself. Okay, just like in Daniel chapter 8, this beast gets his power from someone else. He gets his power from Satan. See Daniel chapter 8, verse 24, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He gets it from Satan. That's where he's getting it from. The passage says it was like the leopard, which would be Greece. Well, here's your Greek Empire. Look at this. I want you to look at the territory. Look at these territories. You can't make this stuff up. Has the feet of a bear. Look at this. Look at the territories. Okay, this is going to be important. Has the mouth of a lion. Look at this. This is Babylon. All right. Okay. Now have a look. You tell me. Look at what we see right here. What do we see? We see this two-part Islamic empire essentially put together in the areas that we should see it in. Folks, this is what we call a clue. This isn't even a clue. This is basically having our noses stuck right in it and simply saying that this beast seen in Revelation chapter 13 has Greek elements to it, has Babylonian elements to it, has Persian elements into it. And we look at those territories on the maps and everything, and we look at this map of this two-part, basically Islamic empire. What do we see? You tell me. I mean, there was very little of this just above the Black Sea primarily that was not part of that trifecta of empires, of successive empires that we saw both in Daniel and what we actually see here. So you can stubbornly, go ahead and stick your head in Europe and, try to find this in Europe, but you will not find a fit like this, period. You will not find a fit like this. It's only a stubborn mind and a stubborn head and some thump chesting or chest thumping, chest pounding preacher or book or something like that that's going to try to force us into a different paradigm. The idea that we're going to actually find anything like this in Europe is absurd. And then what you have to do is you have to say, well, like and sort of and kind of and stuff like that, not literally and what have you. But then here we have a literal fit right here. Okay? So, I'm going to go with this. And to be honest with you, you're not going to find anything that's going to defeat this. Revelation 13, the rise of the beast. 13:3, one of the heads has a deadly wound healed. 13:4, world wonders at ability to make war. Compare this with Daniel 8:24. 13:5-6, boasting, big mouth. Look at this with Daniel 7, verses 8:25 and 8:25. Okay? 13:7-10, Revelation 13:7-10, makes war with the saints. Compare this with Daniel 7:25 and Daniel 8:10 and 24. Notice the word continue in verse 13, I say in verse 5 of chapter 13. Okay? When you look at Revelation 13, verse 5, it says that he will continue to do what he's doing. That would suggest that he is already active prior to the events of chapter 12 and 13. Look at Daniel 7:8. You see him, he's uprooting 3 of the horns and he's uttering great boasts prior to the saints arriving in heaven. This would indicate that he's on the scene and he's identifiable prior to what I believe is depicted as the rapture in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9 and 10. Look at chapter 13, verses 11 through 19. We have a false prophet. This is a new revelation to the prophecy. It's not mentioned in the Old Testament that we can see. The 7 heads. And here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goes into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength to the beast. Look at the word and. The word here is kai, apparently a primary particle having a cooperative, sometimes also a cumulative force, and also even, so then, to, etc., often used in connection or composition with other particles or small words, and also but, both, even, for, if, or, so that, even, then, therefore, when, yet. In the case, or in the above case, the word and is both copulative, connecting the previous clause of verse 9, and cumulative, ending the proposition started in verse 9. The idea behind this is that this is a continuous thought. If you actually read the verses in the new translations, we see it in NIV, New American Standard, and so forth, they translate this where they will specifically say that the 7 mountains are 7 kings. In the King James, they use the word and in a conjunction form, continuing the same thought from the previous clause. And so it's exactly the same. It's saying that there are 7 mountains and there are 7 kings. The and is a cumulative, copulative force connecting the previous clause of there being 7 mountains and 7 kings. Thus, the conclusion is that the 7 mountains are 7 kings. But even in the new translations, they translate it that way. Look in the New American Standard. It says the 7 mountains are 7 kings. Okay? And so we fully understand how this can work when it says later on, 5 have been, 1 is there, 1 is now, 1 is yet to come. So when talking about the whore of Babylon in chapter 17 of Revelation, hence the 7 mountains are 7 kings upon which the woman sits, the context tells us that they are nations. It is very common for nations to be associated with or as mountains. If they are literal mountains upon which a woman or city such as Rome sits, a major problem has to be dealt with. The mountains come and go. Having pointed that out, it is safe to say that the only person trying to hold on to a Roman narrative would ignore the fact that the mountains come and go. Who could these mountains be referring to? Here's a suggestion. Before we go on to that, let's just kind of think through this real quick, okay? If these 7 mountains are the 7 hills or 7 mountains upon which Rome sits, the problem is when John wrote, 5 of them were missing. They were gone. There was only 1 there. And another one was yet to come, and there was going to be even an 8th one. So you have this city sitting on 7 mountains, 5 of which are not there. Only 1 is there. One's going to come later on, and another one's going to come later on. I want you to think about the absurdity of that, and then stop and change your position. It is not possible. It is not possible for any city to survive the rise and fall of any mountain. The rise and fall of any mountain? Who would even build a city there? I live in California. I live in an earthquake zone. In fact, there's actually a fault line about 3 houses from my house. They would not build a house on that fault line for several years until they determined that that fault line was no longer active. So the bottom line is that there's no way possible that you can actually say that Rome is being represented here because it's a city on 7 hills. That's not possible. They weren't even there when John was writing. So here's a suggestion. Let's have a look. 5 have fallen, all right? I'm going to go with the idea that these are actually these mountains, which scripturally and even historically, mountains were associated with kingdoms. They were associated with nations. Sometimes they actually had a literal mountain that they associated themselves with. Sometimes they did not. But nations were associated with mountains, either figuratively or literally. 5 have fallen. Well, if we look at the territory that we just looked at, let's have a look here. What kingdoms could possibly be being referred to here as having fallen? 5 have fallen. Here we go. Egypt, Hittite, Assyria, Babylon, Persia. There's your 5. There's your 5 that have fallen. Okay? But 1 was still there at the time. If we're going to talk about the Greco-Roman period, let's have a look. 1 is the Greco-Roman period. 1 is yet to come. Islam. See here. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7. That's what I'm going to go with, folks. I don't have to make this fit. I have to unfit it in order to make it not fit. For those who want to have a European or a Roman Catholic Antichrist, there is a major problem. Not only does your city of 7 hills argument argue against you, the Catholic Church has never had any foothold with the 7 heads. It cannot be said to be of the 7, specifically if we're going to look at these empires as being Middle Eastern type empires. So if we're going to look at this beast that has Persian, Babylonian, and Greek components to it, if we're going to look at this beast this beast upon which a woman rides, okay, this beast has 7 heads, and this woman rides on this beast, and this beast has 7 heads. And these 7 heads are 7 kingdoms, 7 empires, as it were, 7 nations, or whatever you want to call it, empires, okay, upon which this woman rides, and they appear to be Egypt, Assyria, Hittite, Persia, Babylon, Greco-Roman period, Islam. Okay, if this woman is writing on this, we're going to figure out first of all what we're looking at. And on with this 7 heads, there are 10 horns. Let's see if we can identify these horns in here. If you remember what we talked about earlier on, that at the end of World War One, by the World War One time, the Ottoman, Safavid, Shia areas were basically reduced down in terms of empires, reduced down to the area of the Middle East, and we actually saw it as being reduced, with both of them being reduced to essentially this area right through here. See if we can get this up here real quick. Essentially being reduced to areas right up in through here. All right, these would be the areas wherein these particular empires were essentially reduced right through here, like so. Right, that's kind of essentially where they would have been at. And so if we look at that, we just keep that in mind, and let's just kind of go through and see if we can see a division in here and how this would actually work. Let's give this a shot. Let's go ahead and erase this right here. Okay, so what do we have? We have Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Oman, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Israel. Okay, that's a total of what? 14 states, or is that 16 states? That's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 states altogether. All right. Now I say right up in here at the top, it says Turkey and Iran are the sponsor states of the Ottoman and Safavid empires. So we have, I'm going to state it like this: Turkey and Iran may or may not be included in this, but we're going to look at an option where that would actually be included. So if Turkey and Iran are actually the sponsor empires, where Turkey is the original basically territory of the Ottomans and Iran the original territory of the Safavids, let's look at their empire itself as it's broken up in these 14 states here altogether. But let's kind of look at some other things, all right? Egypt was not part of the Ottoman Empire at the time of its breakup. It simply wasn't. It just was not in the Ottoman Empire at the time of the start of World War I. Okay, it'll also be considered the enemy of Antichrist, and so according to Daniel 11:25-24, it cannot be one of the horns. So you end up with 13 states: Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Dubai, Oman, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. But let's continue to look. According to Daniel chapter 11:41, Jordan will be delivered from Antichrist. So now you're left with 12 states: Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, UAE that is, Dubai, Oman, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. So you got 12 states left. So let's continue. Though he desperately wants it, Israel is clearly not part of the 10 horns. So let's go with this: Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Dubai, Oman, Yemen, Saudi Arabia. Okay, how you can't make this work still, but let's have a look at this. So this takes a little bit of a detour, but it'll keep us on track. With the devastating arguments of the 7 heads and the 7 mountains presented earlier in this video, we need to look for a better position regarding who and where the whore of Babylon is. Revelation 17-18 describe her sins and destruction, the empires that she sits on, and those who hate her. Who are the empires that she sits on? Those are the 7 heads, 5 of which had fallen by the time John was writing his book of Revelation. Isaiah 21 describes her geographic location as being in Arabia along the Red Sea. It even describes a forested area. Ironically, the Arabian Peninsula has a forest in the area of Mecca and Medina. The passage also states that there is hostility between her and Iran, that is Iran. Conclusion: Saudi Arabia, Mecca, is the whore of Babylon. She is the seat of Kabbalah, mystery religion. Mecca is where it primarily all began. The development or the importation of Kabbalah from Babylon down to Mecca, and from there continue to develop over time as we have seen. So here's what we're looking at. We are actually looking at this area right through here as not being one of the horns of of uh, of the beast. We also would eliminate this area right here. Okay, we would eliminate Israel as well, and we would also eliminate Egypt. If you have the sponsor states of Turkey and Iran as being the, shall we see, the primary places for the old empires, you end up with this. You end up with Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Dubai, Oman, and Yemen. 10 states total. However, some people are going to argue that places like Yemen and Oman were part of the British Empire still even after World War I. That being the case, then we can argue that Turkey and Iran are part of the 10 horns. And that might actually be a better fit because we're told that this little horn rises up from among them. So let's have a look at this. What do we got? We would have Turkey, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Dubai, a total of 10 states. 10 states coming out of the area that would have been under the control of the old two-sided Islamic empire prior to World War I, where it had shrunk to its smallest portion prior to being broke up. That's what we've got. That's what we've got. In 1979, Iran threw off her secular state and reestablished itself under Shia Islam. It has engaged in a terror campaign ever since, undermining governments around the Middle East as it seeks to spread its influence. Is it possible that this was the beginning of the deadly wound being healed on one of the heads? In 1994, a Turkish soccer player was elected mayor of Istanbul. He was jailed for inciting radical Sunni Islam. He started the AKP party with the intent of reestablishing Ottoman rule in the region. In 2003, he was elected prime minister. In 2014, he was elected president. In 2017, he was elected as president for life with sweeping powers. He seeks to establish a single Islamic front and work out differences between Sunni and Shia. His terror army is ISIS. He has uprooted Iraq and is currently trying to uproot or topple Syria. His name is Erdogan, and he's one to watch. I'm not calling this out yet, okay, but I'm just simply sitting there and saying this is one to watch. And we have, for the first time now, we have Iran, Shia, and Sunni, Turkey, Ottoman getting together and working together. They have a common enemy. That common enemy is Saudi Arabia. They hate Saudi Arabia. The seat of Islam switched to Saudi Arabia at the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, or the collapse of basically the two-sided Islamic empire after World War I, and that seat of Islam went to Saudi Arabia. And both Iran and Turkey hate Saudi Arabia. They also hate Israel, and they also hate Egypt. Okay, they have the right enemies. This is another clue. For the first time ever, Turkey and Iran are cooperating on a number of fronts. They are cooperating in Iraq and Syria. They both seek the destruction of Israel, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. They're both trying to form a united Islamic front against not only the above, but against the West, and seek an Islamic superstate. I personally believe that what we have happening is we have one of the heads that was received a deadly wound, which I believe was Islam, which was the seventh head, is being revived. And it's being revived under an Islamic unity movement, and it's going to be the eighth, and it's going to be standing among the empires.